Yeah, well, again, I think what you're describing, first of all, I think that segues really nicely in today's episode. But what you're showing is it does take a lot of intention to accomplish a goal. Like because I have some patients that will come in and say, tomorrow I'm going to start walking 3 miles a day, right? And the reason it doesn't work 90% of the time or 95% of the time is because there's obstacles and there are things that you probably want to think through before you jump from 0 to 100, which I guess segues nicely into this idea of delaying gratification.
Well, before we get to that, why don't we say hello to the people?
There you go.
So welcome back to the Common Sense Medicine Podcast with your host, Timothy Chen, Dr. Timothy Chen. I'm your co-host, Michael Abernathy, and we're going to be continuing our discussion on the behavioral change and psychological aspects behind successful weight loss.
There you
go. So do you want to catch us up as to where we were over the last couple of weeks and what we plan on talking about today?
Yeah, well, we took a break because of holiday season, but with being the new year, this is a perfect time to get back on track. We ended the last, series on this idea of adjusting our environment.
Yep.
And I think that was great because that is really, really practical. It's something that I think a lot of us that are trying to be successful, we subconsciously do, right? We subconsciously start moving our schedule around, moving food around in the house, moving habits around, because we know that our environment can make us or break us. And with that being said, we're moving on today, which is this idea of delaying gratification.
Yeah. So if environmental design is one of the more powerful tools in our toolbox, one of the most important skills that we can learn is the ability to delay gratification. And I guess that would be improving willpower a little bit. But so I want to start by answering the question of what is delayed gratification.
Okay.
So definitionally, I'll read it here. Delayed gratification is the act of sacrificing an immediate reward in favor of an even better reward in the future. And so, when we talk about weight loss, I think the immediate example would be food choices.
Yes.
Where we make a food choice and we have the ability to decide to eat this candy bar or drink this soda now. And that'll give us, some sort of good feeling that we have, or that we're looking for, satisfy that desire now. But with weight loss, we're trying to make healthier decisions long-term so that future us will be healthy. And so sometimes we have to kind of forego the current desire to have that Coke and maybe drink some water today.
Yeah.
And, that kind of, as you continue to do that, you see those results. But it's not as easy as it sounds sometimes.
No. I would say delayed gratification in all aspects of life is probably one of the hardest skills to learn. But you would almost say that most people who are ultra successful, you look at the Elon Musks of the world, or even not even just in weight loss, these tech billionaires, they all apply this skill in whatever aspect it is in their life. They had to be able to, I guess the story is like people are partying and the guy is the one still studying, right? And in the end, he's the one that's actually further along, right? The Bezos guy, the Amazon guy, right? He started off with, boring job of putting books in boxes in his garage and shipping them. And now, it pays off. But this skill of delayed gratification when it comes to weight loss is just as important because so many decisions we do can affect the weight loss or the future self that we want to see us in. But it does take some vision and some, determination to make that happen.
Yeah, and there was a study talking about the successful tech people and kind of other aspects of life. The staple study on delayed gratification was the Stanford marshmallow experiment.
Okay.
And so if you're not familiar with that, it's where they got they went into this like daycare, this little school, and the average age was like 4 years old. So they got all these kids and they'd put them in a room and they'd give them a bell and they'd tell them, okay, you can, and I think they'd put a marshmallow in front of them and they'd say, you can ring this bell and eat that marshmallow at any point in time. But if you can wait until I come back in the room, which was about like 15 minutes, I'll give you a second marshmallow. And so they would leave the room. And not all of the kids, because 4 years old is kind of that's early. And so what they were seeing was like, what percentage of kids have the ability to not ring the bell and wait the 15 minutes and then get 2 marshmallows, right? So that's straight up delayed gratification.
Right.
And then like 40 years go by and they look at all these kids, and the ones that were able to wait the 15 minutes and not ring the bell and eat the first marshmallow were successful in like so many different areas of their lives. More recently, they've kind of recreated this study, but what they found was that the study wasn't perfect. All of the kids were kind of from the same, socioeconomic status and same kind of cultural backgrounds. And so their results were kind of specific to that type of household, I guess. And when you broaden it out, the accuracy of predicting dropped by about 50%, which is still pretty good at predicting success. But what that means to me is that not everybody that waits the 15 minutes is successful later in life, and not everybody that rings the bell immediately is unsuccessful, which means that we can change our ability. We're not born with it. Some of us are probably predisposed to having either genetically or from our socioeconomical background or cultural upbringing, whatever, have better delayed gratification built into those systems that we grow up in. But that doesn't mean that we have no control over improving them. So there's hope.
There's definitely hope. And I think like any other skill we've mentioned this entire podcast, this is something that you can improve with practice. I do think it helps if you're surrounded by people who also do the same thing. You know what I mean? Like if you're surrounded by people who are instantly trying to gratify themselves immediately, it's harder to do that. But if you're surrounded by people who are, maybe everybody is studying together to go to whatever school, it makes it easier to kind of follow along. Did I mention something?
You're getting ahead of us.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You jump into next week's episode.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Dad. Y'all want to stick right
you're
next week.
absolutely right, though. 100% correct. And we're going to talk about that next week. The importance of surrounding yourself with people that have similar goals and desires and yeah.
Okay.
We'll talk all about that.
Tune in
next week.
That's right.
But I wanted to talk about what those kids were doing in the study that helped them to delay gratification, because they used kind of different techniques, which we can use today.
Yeah.
And so they categorized the ways that these kids delayed their gratification in 2 different ways: hot or cool. And so cool techniques would be like covering their eyes, right? If they just don't look at the marshmallow, they're not going to be tempted by it. Or just putting a hat or a cup over the marshmallow and hiding it, or just moving it further away and removing the bell so that they couldn't ring it. And some of them hid under the table and just sat there, or just looked at the wall. So that it was basically, putting the hand over the eyes, covering the face, all avoidance techniques to separate themselves from the object. And so that's where environmental design comes in.
Yes.
Right. And so there's success to be found there. Hot techniques are tied to the senses. And so when you think about an object and its temptation, right, like a chocolate bar, you think, man, it's sweet, it's savory, it melts in your mouth just right. It has this smell that, that's distinct. And, depending on the type of chocolate, it might have Crispies in it that give you just the right amount of crunch. Yeah. Right. And I'm getting hungry.
I was like, yeah, that sounds delicious.
And so those things really play on your kind of temptation, your desire to want that thing.
Right.
And so we can play off of those to reduce the desirability of that object by thinking about something else that's more tempting than that. And so if you really like the sweetness of that particular chocolate that you're looking at, think about something else that you would like even more, and like really think about the taste and the smell and the mouthfeel and all that stuff, the desirable qualities. And that can actually reduce the value that your brain places on that object and make it easier to say no to it.
That is a fascinating technique. Because, right, I mean, I think avoidance for sure. I think everybody's like, yeah, we just don't see it. And like I said, this puts it, if you hadn't listened to last week's episode, you should definitely go back and listen, because that's what we do, right? If we know Oreos are tempting, we don't put it in the house, because that way we won't be tempted. What you're saying here is assigning value to something better to essentially shut your brain down on what you see in front of you.
Yeah, and that puts it in the immediate, because a lot of times, like with weight loss, right? Lower weight. Here's a reason that we do this. It's called delayed discounting, where like weight loss is kind of an intangible thing. We don't grab lower weight, we just see it, right? And it happens gradually over time. And so the longer or the larger the time gap between now and the reward, our brains will start to discount the value of that in favor of more immediate things. And so with weight loss, because it's a long-term thing, our brains are trying to basically prioritize the now over the future. And it will just unconsciously tell you that the weight loss, it's not as important as this. And so we have to consciously do that. Well, let's see, I forgot where we were. You were talking about
using future things to discount.
So instead of trying to use the future, saying, oh, well, I want to lose weight, because we delay or we discount that reward, using a higher immediate reward, or at least the idea of it, can help to kind of counter that if our long-term reward is being discounted by our brain and we're just not able to kind of prioritize that over the current, right? So it's kind of manipulating how your brain works with, reward seeking to, instead of prioritize future, minimize current. Right. And so it ends up being the same result, just tackled from a different way.
Well, that actually helps me out a lot, because a lot of times when we talk to patients about their health, right, their diabetes control, something like that, we would say something like somebody who's 40 or 50 years old, 40-year-old, and we're talking about, like, you know what, when you're 65 and you're retired, you want to be able to walk and go on trips and stuff like that. But to a lot of patients, that's so far away, they can't see it. To them, they're like, okay, that sounds great and amazing. I don't want to be wheelchair bound because of my obesity. But at the same time, I'm really hungry right now, and I really want that fried chicken in front of me. So you're right. Sometimes if it's too far away, they can't visualize it. Or if it doesn't cause any discomfort, you're like, I don't feel bad on my diabetes, whether I eat a chocolate cake or not. So to me, I assign no value to how I feel, because I quote, quote, don't feel bad. Which again is interesting, because usually once they've changed their diet, they feel significantly better. They don't realize how bad they feel. But you're right. Assigning value sometimes too far is a hindrance. We have to figure out how to assign something closer, and that will help lower the appeal of a fried chicken.
Right. And it's crazy that you say that, because that happens to be where we're about to go with our conversation. I did want to say one more thing about the kind of reframing using the hot techniques and sensory. Another thing that you can do is, instead of looking at, like, if it's a piece of chocolate, and we're just going to keep using that example, instead of focusing on the flavor, the smell, the mouthfeel, the texture, like all that, describe it as in its objective, like, physical appearance. It's round, it's small, it's brown, it has whatever. And so what you're doing is you're programming yourself to see it not as a tasty, great smelling, just amazing textured, food, and it's a thing. And so if you can reframe how you describe it to yourself, a lot of times that can kind of make it less valuable to that part of the brain that wants it. So
So essentially, you're almost making like a video ad, like, you go to movies and have the Coca-Cola ad. And it's like, you can hear everything, see the bubbles, and you can almost start tasting Coke, and enough to be like, I'm gonna go buy Coke right now. You're almost like reversing, like, this is a brown liquid in a plastic bottle.
Yes, that sounds a lot less appealing than the associations that you build with the sound and the fizz and all that.
Brilliant.
So I thought that was interesting. So we're going to move on. And, when we talk about delayed gratification, we're talking about it in the context of, the choices that we make. And so I want to talk briefly about choice and then move on. But if you had to describe in the most basic, fundamental way what most of our choices are about, how would you describe that? Just in general.
What I want, which is what I don't want.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good way to word it. But the way that I have it is increasing pleasure or decreasing pain, which, I mean, is another way to say exactly what you said. That was a great answer.
There you go.
And so who are we usually making choices for?
Just us.
Which us?
Oh, the immediate us.
The immediate us. And we talked about that in previous episodes, and how our brains are programmed to prioritize the current us because, you know, for the vast majority of human history, we were dying before 35, and there was not really a lot to do about that. So there wasn't a really a good reason to think about the future in those terms, but that's not the world we live in. And so we kind of have to do that. And so, how do we do that? That's the question. Or actually another question. So if we're making bad choices now that don't harm us immediately, right? So a single instance of eating bad food is not going to harm you now, but it will harm future you. So you have to ask, why would we do things now that we know will hurt us in the future?
Correct.
Right? So why don't we consider that self-harm? Right?
Right.
Do you have a good answer for that?
I don't. But I mean, this is what, I mean, patients who are addicted to drugs, this is exactly what, like, you're doing this right now that will harm your, I mean, future self is like 6 months future self.
Yeah.
Yeah. But obviously there's biochemical stuff going in the brain, but you keep choosing pleasure now for harm literally in like 3 months, you know? So
yeah. And so it's a thing. It's, but there have been studies on this. And so you know what an fMRI study is?
Yes.
So explain an fMRI study.
So this is essentially like a functional MRI. So your usual, regular MRIs are looking at structures of things, right? So they scan your brain. They want to look at how this brain looks. They're looking for signs of bleeding, something that's structurally changing in the brain. Functional MRI is looking at what part of the brain lights up, right? So they can see function of the brain, and they'll expose you to certain things. They want to see what parts of your brain light up to get an understanding of how your brain is functioning when it does something in action versus just a standard structure.
Right. And so there was a study called the Hal Erzner Hirschfield fMRI study. And so what they did was they did these studies with people, and they asked them questions about themselves and asked them to visualize themselves, and they saw what parts of the brain lit up. And every time they asked them a question about themselves now, the same part of the brain lit up. If they asked them a question about the future version of themselves, like 10 years in the future, the part of the brain that lit up was not the same part of the brain. It was the same. It was the part of the brain that lit up when they asked them about other people, like specifically celebrities. So people that they kind of know of, but don't have any kind of attachment or relation or connection or anything to. And so what that study showed was that when we think about future us, we do not consider that us. Our brain looks at future us as a completely different person. And so when we do things now that hurt them, we're not prioritizing them because we don't associate it with us. So we're not hurting ourselves when we do that.
Interesting.
At least not according to our brain.
Yeah.
So the more, prefrontal cortex logical thinking, we understand that we are, but the part of our brain that kind of helps drive behavior doesn't care.
Yeah.
We don't know that person.
Me.
They're out there. They're someone else. That doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. I mean, there's a reason why we tell people, like, why are you self-sabotaging, self-destructive behavior, or like, you're diabetic, you've been in the hospital before, why are you still doing this? And it's because I'm eating this to help me now. I feel better, but I don't know who that future person is. It has nothing to do with me.
Yep. So our brains, we just don't have an emotional attachment to future self. And so we're not going to act in their best interest. The same way that I'm not going to eat healthy so you lose weight.
Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. I'm not going to lift weights so that you put on muscle. Like, that's not how that works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so we need to figure out how to connect with future self in ways that kind of establish that connection.
Yeah.
Because if you can do that, you really improve your chances of success in the long term, because now you make decisions now with that connected person. And so that same team did a follow-up study where they took pictures of the subjects, and then for half of them, they aged them. They gave them jowls, they gave them wrinkles and bags under their eyes and gray hair. And then they put them in this like virtual reality simulator, like a video game essentially. And half of them got their old avatars and the other half got their current avatars, right? That look just like them. And all of them were placed when they entered the world. They were given a mirror and they looked into the mirror. So half of them saw old versions of themselves and half of them saw current versions of themselves. And then they were given $1,000 of virtual currency and told to spend it in one of 4 different ways. And so the 4 different options were buying something nice for someone special, investing in a retirement fund, planning a fun party, or putting money into a checking account. And so the people that saw the old version of themselves were twice as likely. Let me make sure that's right. Yes, twice as likely to put it into the retirement account and invest their money more conservatively for better future outcomes.
Interesting. So it's almost like once they can align future self with current self, they actually do things to benefit future self.
Yeah. And so the tangible visualization of your future self makes them less like a stranger to you, because when you see that, you know, in that type of environment, that's kind of specific. But you know, when you move around in front of it, you see the movement. You raise your hand, it raises its hand. You talk, you see it talk. So it looks like you. It develops this, you know, attachment. And then you act on its behalf because you see that as you, right?
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, once you have a relationship, I mean, quote unquote, a relationship with your future self, I mean, you treat your family different than you treat a stranger. Like, I mean, I treat my wife different than Taylor Swift. I don't know who Taylor Swift is.
I do nothing in my life to benefit Taylor Swift.
Exactly. Like, yeah. But your family, you do, right? And so you will sacrifice things, especially as a parent, for your wife, for your kids, and stuff like that, because there's different value to them. And so it's the same thing for your future. Like, you have, if you can somehow align the future self with you, then maybe you're exercising, or you're getting up early and, you know, not being comfortable, being sore when you work out. Although now it feels kind of fun when you're kind of sore. That starts to have benefit to you, both of y'all. Now, and then future you. Then if you were like, that's just a stranger, I have no clue why I'm working out right now.
Well, fortunately, we aren't just relegated to virtual reality simulations. I do have 2 other ways that you can kind of help. One of them was a study where they were the subjects were told to write a letter to themselves in the future. And I don't remember exactly how far out in the future. It was like maybe 10 or 20 years. But they were told to write a letter to themselves. And the people that did made better health choices in the weeks following writing the letter. Because when you write it and you address it and you write it to yourself and then mail it with the intention of it getting to you, like, you're putting that out into the physical reality that this is to a real person. This letter is going somewhere real, right? Even if it's just to you. But something about writing it down and kind of getting it out of here and manifesting it in some, even in a, kind of abstract way, with the letter can help. And the other thing is something that I've been coaching people to do for a long time, even before I knew there was a term for it. But the way that I would do it is, I would say, when you're about to make a choice, like if you're going to buy a Coke, ask yourself, is this getting me where I want to be? Right. And so you just make that a habit of saying, is this getting me where I want to be? And so that's actually called episodic future thinking, where you just, often when you're making choices, ask yourself. And I think, I want to say James Clear wrote about this in Atomic Habits. It's like the 10-10-10 rule, or the 5-5-5, where it's like, when you make a decision, ask yourself, how am I going to feel about this choice in 5 minutes? How am I going to feel about it in 5 days, 5 weeks, or whatever? And it kind of makes you think, well, in 5 minutes, I'm going to be really good because it's going to help me. But in, 5 weeks or 5 days, I'm probably going to be like, I probably shouldn't have done that, you know? And if I continue to make this decision in 5 years, I'm probably not going to be where I want to be.
Yeah.
Right. So it's weighing the value of that choice now and in multiple points in the future, so that you're constantly connecting back to future self and then bringing it back to now. So it's maintaining that, you know, connection in your brain and keeping it at the forefront of your decision making.
Awesome. Well, and again, I think as people are watching this podcast series, I think people are starting to realize how much mental side it takes to change a habit. Yeah. I mean, I would say a majority, I mean, the science of it makes sense, you know, and most Instagram influencers are talking about, well, you need to, you know, keto this or paleo that or whatever, you know, new diet thing is out. But the brain's ability to actually change things, that's a tough one.
Well, I'm gonna talk about this, but I won't get into it too much. I'm writing a book about this exact thing.
Okay.
I became a dietitian and a coach to help people improve their lives. I did it specifically to lose weight. And my assumption when I started was that people, if they just knew the right information, if they just had enough information, they'd be able to do the things that they say they want to do.
Yeah.
Right. It's lack of information. So I became a dietitian so that I could give people the right information. It's not that at all. I cannot tell you how often I'm told I know what to do.
Yes.
I just don't do it.
Yeah.
And so if it's not a lack of information, what is it? And so that is my life's journey right now, is to try to answer that question. Because if we can answer that question, we're gonna be so much better off.
Absolutely.
And it's such a complicated, you know, multifaceted question that is probably going to have a different answer for every single individual. And so I'm just exploring that. And so I'm writing a book on my exploration of that topic.
I like it.
I have no details to share or time frame, but it's more of a, you know, one of those personal projects of improvement and, you know, getting better at what I do.
Well, no. And again, I mean, it's one of those things that we hear all the time. I mean, if we don't figure this piece out from a healthcare standpoint, we're just gonna, you know, you can yell at pharma all day you want, you know, all the time, you know, about blood pressure medicine, cholesterol medicine, and not want to take them because pharma made them, whatever. But if you can't figure out this piece, you're gonna have to take them, or we're gonna have a stroke. You know, like we can pick whichever one you want, you know. But again, this aspect of turning specifically today, like being able to visualize how this is gonna affect you in the future, it's just like crucial. Dang.
Okay, so takeaway.
Yes.
I'll just read my summary here and close us out.
There you go.
People who are successful with losing weight and keeping it off tend to be better at delaying gratification than those who aren't. We aren't very good at delaying gratification because we aren't emotionally attached to the version of ourselves that benefits from that sacrifice. It comes down to visualizing exactly who you want to become and finding ways to make a more tangible connection with that future version of you, and then getting better at sacrificing in the present for a better reward in the future.
Perfect. Great. Again, I think this is another one of those episodes that people really need to take, even if you need to just like, you know what, today you will write a letter to yourself.
Just start
somewhere, right? Because again, our habits will never change until we can learn this skill to delay our gratification.
Well, I mean, I don't know what you plan to do with the intro to the intro, where we were talking about, you know, mental contrasting and implementation intentions. And, but yeah, you can throw that in and have people start writing letters to themselves, telling them, you know, write out the obstacles that you think you're going to face. Give that to the future you and let them know what you're going to overcome.
I like it. For sure. Well, thanks again, Michael. Next week,
absolutely.
We are going on. So we are talking about groups. Right?
Social support and why that is pivotal.
Awesome. We'll look forward to it.
All right. See you next time.